So let me introduce our next keynote speaker. It's basically the game, crime, and other stuff track, which we called the potpourri track. And Sonja Gabriel, she's a very old friend of Frog and of the Center for Applied Game Studies. She's from the Teacher University in Krems. And she will speak about hate speech in digital games. Are online games a place of discrimination and exclusion? Sonja, the floor is yours for the next 40 minutes.
Thank you for the nice introduction. So as Scott already said, he doesn't want to be the grumpy old uncle. Now I think I will be the grumpy old aunt talking about hate speech, the not so nice things about digital games. And I'm going to ask the question if online games really are a place of discrimination and exclusion. So what do I want to do the next half an hour? Basically, I would like to look with you what basically is hate speech. So how do you define hate speech? I would like to look at some examples of hate speech and connection with online gaming or games in general. And we will have a look what game companies and platforms do to kind of get rid of hate speech, or at least make it less of a problem as it has become the last years. First of all, of course, we have to have a look what is hate speech. I have to say there is no universal definition of hate speech. So I've put you one here by the United Nations, which is rather a new definition. So, but of course, hate speech is something that has been around for quite a long time. And in 1997, for example, there was a definition by the Council of Europe, and they also dealt with hate speech, but they stressed more the xenophobic statements, but also included other forms of hate speech as well. Here you can see the difference. United Nations definition already includes religion, ethnicity, nationality, color, gender, and so on. So there are lots of more things included in hate speech. But what we basically can say, there's some things all these definitions have in common. So when talking about hate speech, it's normally always about verbal attacks. So either in written or spoken language, or it can also be using pictures. So, you know, all these nice or not so nice pictures, funny, not so funny pictures that are around, which also can be used for hate speech. All definitions always talk about inhuman statements. So all these statements are made in order to humiliate others. And as we've already seen in the definition before by the United Nations, it targets groups of people because of their kind of otherness. So because of their skin color, their sexual orientation, their age, their disability, or just because of being part of a certain group or having a certain profession. And something that's quite interesting, I think, about the definition of hate speech. So the victims decide if a statement is hate speech or not. So it's not the other people saying, okay, that's hate speech, but really the group concerned, or which is kind of the aim of hate speech, say, okay, that's hate speech or that's not hate speech. So, which I think is a difference compared to talking about things like cyberbullying, for example. Yeah, why do people go for hate speech? When you have listened to Scott's talk, he already said part of the problem is, of course, that games are very competitive, and that might lead, of course, to hate speech as well, because, you know, when you play a game, there are many emotions involved. But there are certain patterns of language that are used for hate speech, and it's always deliberately making false statements. And Sometimes these statements can also be disguised as humor or irony. So there are basically, if you have a look at literature, 4 kinds of motivation. So you want to exclude people or a group of people. So from playing in general, from a team, whatever. There's intimidation. So yeah, the aims of your own group, so the group you feel you belong to, is kind of stressed as the good ones, and the others are blamed for being different, for doing something not as good. Yeah, and quite similar is domination. So there's one group feeling superior to another group, so they want kind of, yeah, they're seen as we're better than the others. Like, for example, if you have new players, so they can't play, so we're the ones, or all kind of, yeah, groups that might be blamed for whatever. And the last part, which is about fun and thrill, is also something that might be a problem when it comes to hate speech. For some people, it's just funny, or kind of, yeah, giving them a thrill because they're anonymous, or they think they're anonymous in their online world, and so they want to insult or intimidate others. So these are kind of the reasons quite often giving why there is hate speech. So of course, that's in general, that's not only for games or online games, that's for social networks as well, and for all kind of communication in the online world, or also in printed version. So let's have a closer look at games and hate speech. So of course, there are more and more games having to do with communication. So you have communication opportunities in games. You can contact other people. Sometimes it's even necessary that you communicate with others for forming a team, solving quests, whatsoever. And hate speech especially has become a problem in the last years. So it has become a very dominant problem, and that's something we already heard about when Scott also talked about hashtag Gamergate. That was really not the beginning of hate speech, of course, but it's the kind of start of hate speech discussion in video games. So when really people started talking also outside the game world about hate speech, about harassment, and you know, so Gamergate was about online harassment campaign, which targeted several women in the video game industry, but that was kind of really the start, so that, okay, let's have a closer look what happens in games, what kind of language is used, why are games quite often called toxic environments. And when talking about games and toxic environments, so there are differences between game communities. So we have already heard about League of Legends being, or having been, a very, very toxic environment. Basically, we have to say not all gamers are, of course, racist or using hate speech, but as we've already said, gaming can lead to negative emotions as well, competition. So that might be one of the problems. And of course, also this anonymity, all these kind of things. So is it really that bad when talking about hate speech in games? Here's some figures which were done by an anti-hate organization in the US. He had a closer look about gamers in the United States and what they experienced about hate speech. And you can see the figures are really kind of talking for themselves. So a lot of people already have come across hate speech or any kind of harassment. Sometimes it's even, or that's a bad thing, it's even severe harassment, also threatening people physically, like even stalking other players. So not only just being inside the game, but also, yeah, kind of violence, moving outside the game and maybe even really physical, not only virtual. Yeah, what about the games? That's the survey also by the same organization, and they had a look at which games are, so to say, more toxic than other games. And yeah, you can see here there are, of course, some games where there is a lot of hate speech within. Of course, all these kind of, let's say, adult online games, but if you have a look, you will also find Fortnite in this list, as well as Minecraft. And I think that's, for me, especially kind of shocking, because these are definitely games also played by children and teenagers. And of course, they also come into contact with hate speech quite early. Yeah, here you have got an example how these hate speech might look like if you're in the happy position never having experienced any hate speech in any game. So that's an example taken from League of Legends. And don't want to go into detail because I think you can read through for yourself. So League of Legends really used to be known as a very toxic community where there was a lot of hate speech. Of course, Riot Games tried to do something about that. So they tried to tackle these issues. They increased the ban rates for hate speech, for example, for players. And I've read in June this year, they want to do, or they patented a kind of good behavior island, so not only kind of punishing for bad behavior, but kind of giving rewards to players that behave in a positive way, which might be the even better way if you have a look from the pedagogical point of view than just always punishing people for doing things. So of course, if you have in-game chats, there is a lot of possibility for hate speech. But it's not only about written chat or voice chats. There are other possibilities how hate speech is integrated in games as well. This is an example taken from Fortnite. So, you know, Fortnite is, yeah, basically an ego shooter, but where you can also build things. And it's kind of this last man standing game. So you're allowed to build structures, and you can see the symbol that one player has built here, which is also, of course, if you have a look at the definition of hate speech, because it's also about pictures included, an example of hate speech, because we all know what this symbol stands for. And another possibility, which is quite often used by people who really want to intimidate others, are choosing intimidating names, like for clan names here, you can say, or could be team names, could be avatar names. So that's another possibility where hate speech can be found in quite a lot of games, and maybe it takes quite a lot of time until these names are removed. So these were some examples how hate speech can be, or is to be found in games itself, but there are also hate speech in the so-called affinity spaces. So that's a term James Paul G created, and he says, of course, affinity spaces are basically spaces not in the games, but around the games, where people find an area which is based on their common interest, where they kind of exchange things. So it's a bit like the communities of practice we can find in a lot of areas. So this affinity groups are also something you can find in a lot of things around games. Let's have a look at forums, for example, where games are discussed. Have a look at video platforms like YouTube or like Twitch, where people like to talk about games, where they exchange ideas about games and things like that. And that's something where you can also find lots of hate speech. Let me give you some examples. That's a headline basically taken from Washington Post, which was quite, yeah, an outcry. PewDiePie, who is an famous gamer on the internet. So that was the second, basically the second time he was in the news for doing or for using words that were not so fine, or which are really regarded as hate speech. But in 2016, he also started kind of using symbols of National Socialism. He made anti-Semitic jokes and so on. So he was in the headlines back then as well. And later on, during one of his videos, he got angry and called another player nigger. And of course, so yeah, he apologized for saying these things, but yeah, basically that's something that was not the first time happening. Another community, so affinity space or affinity group where you can find quite a lot of hate speech is, for example, the Steam community. There is, as Steam provides, of course, all these nice games we like to play. There are also really extensive communities. And what you can find on Steam are these kind of extremist beliefs. So they use language, as you can see here, associated with white supremacist ideology. They use kind of numeric hate symbols like 88, and they glorify Nazi figures. So there are quite a lot of anti-Semitic postings which can be found on Steam. So just have a look at these two examples here, which I think tell quite a lot about what's going on in Steam communities as well. Yeah, these are another example, Discord, which is also, of course, quite popular with gamers for communication. And there's also quite a lot of racism, hate speech going on in Discord. Here you can see an example using pictures as well, using text, memes. Discord in 2017 started shutting down racist accounts. So last year, so from April to December 2019, 5.2 million accounts were banned. So 5.2 million accounts. So you can imagine how much hate speech there was going on. But the sad thing about it, Discord reports twice a year, there's transparency reports, they call that, what kind of reports they received for different things. So when other users complain about things, you can see down here harassment, so which basically is hate speech, really makes a huge figure. So it's more than a third of all reports received. And then you can see other things like hacks and cheats and spam and things like that. But the problem is there are many, many reports regarding harassment. But yeah, there's only a small proportion which really result in action. So most of the accounts which are banned are because of all the other reasons, not because of hate speech. And quite often, if you report somebody else in Discord, they just basically teach you how to block offending users. So it's not finding a solution or not kind of banning this account. It's basically you're told, okay, block this user so you won't say what this user writes, talks, whatever. So that's, of course, something that needs to be discussed if that can be the right solution for tackling hate speech. Which leads us basically to the third part, the part which offers a lot of discussion. What might be possible solutions? Is it basically possible to get rid of all these hate speech online in game communities, in online games? And what is already done by platforms, by providers to lower the rate of hate speech? So as we have seen, Discord rather goes for, okay, ban this user. What do other kind of platforms, games do? Something you can find for nearly all websites, for all games, for all forums and so on, is the so-called code of conduct. Here's an example for the code of conduct for Overwatch. Where they tell you, of course, you should behave nicely, you should not use any offending content, you should be fair to others, you should not refer to whatever. So you will find that for really all kind of games communities, not only in the gaming sector, but basically for everything. But the interesting or the more interesting thing is, what happens if you do not stick to the code of conduct? And that's what we're going to have a look now. So that's maybe if you're in online gaming, you will know that you quite often can report gamers or players. Here are two examples, one for FIFA. They give you real instructions where you have to turn to, what you have to do in the game. Sometimes you have kind of forms where you have to tick what's the problem, and then you report to the game provider, and you have to wait what will happen. Sometimes, or quite often, it takes a long time until something is happening or you get an answer, because if people have to look through if that's really true and so on, of course, it's very intensive work. Quite often there is no real consequence. So even if you report, like we saw for Discord, they might just say, okay, mute that player or block that player. Something also a lot of companies, especially if you have in-game chats, are doing is using chat filters, which means artificial intelligence filters out whatever words are there and should not be there. So it deletes inappropriate messages or it blocks messages from being sent. The problem with that might be, of course, overblocking, so that, of course, artificial intelligence is not a human being. So sometimes we need to see things in context. So it might happen that things are blocked even if they shouldn't be blocked. And so communication might be disturbed by this artificial intelligence more than it might help. So that's another problem, of course. Companies are working on that. Filtering might be a solution, but it does not work that perfect. There's another example. So Ubisoft implemented in summer 2018 a new system that bans players for not only for using toxic language in the text chat, but also for doing other things, of course. And that was an automated system that's basically like the chat filters, but now it will not just be deleted, but you're banned if you use this or that word or expression or whatever. There were different durations, of course, for bans, but there was a big problem for Ubisoft, and that's the reason why the system was already changed 5 months after they introduced it, because the ban also resulted in removing players from in-game. So when teams were doing something in the game, suddenly somebody wrote a word that was not allowed, and the player was banned. So you can imagine players were not quite happy with that. And there were a lot of complaints to Ubisoft. So they changed the system, and now they're just going back to filtering abusive messages so that they are not be seen by the others, and a report for review is automatically filed, but you can stay within the game. So you can see taking too strict measures might be a problem for playing the game, and might even prevent gamers from really playing the game. So that's something, of course, companies who want to earn money with their game faces them or puts them for another problem. But of course, the pressure on companies is getting harder regarding hate speech, because due to esports becoming more popular, all these let's plays and things, so things not only stay within the games, as we have seen, there are many other things around games. So games have been put more in focus. Many people talk about games, they are part of our culture. And of course, the negative experience and hate speech is much more put in focus, in the public focus. So companies basically can't look away completely like they did, I think, for quite a long time. So they're trying to find new solutions to make players and all the community kind of satisfied. And so apart from reporting systems and punishments, they try kind of to make players aware of the problem and kind of appeal to the team spirit, so finding something positive. So that's an example of an in-game splash message in Fortnite. So where it's kind of, be awesome to each other, care for each other. We don't want our players to use hate speech to harass others and so on. So that's something which you can see quite often. And of course, things happening in our world also influence the gamer community. I think you all can remember when it was the death of George Floyd because of racism, basically, and police misbehaving. And that was also something which you could see that in the game community was a topic, of course, because all these kind of hate speech, all these kind of discrimination went up again because there was this happening outside the games. And here you can see how some of the companies reacted. So they all kind of stood for solidarity, and they all kind of said, okay, so discrimination, exclusion, all kind of things. We don't want to do anything, we don't want to have anything to do with it. So they promised to do something, but basically they did not say how they will change things within their game communities. And of course, it's even quite hard. So another example, of course, for this Black Lives Matter is here for Call of Duty. So also we stand against racism and injustice. So quite a lot of things where they showed their support, but still it does not really help against hate speech really taking place within the games and the game communities. of course, in spring 2020, so people, when all these COVID-19 lockdowns were worldwide, people started to game even more, of course, and playing more games also resulted in having more hate speech, of course. And you could read in media, there were quite a lot of plans what to do about that. Here are two examples from May and June 2020, so that kind of the companies want to tackle that, but again, there are no detailed plans published what they really want to do about that. Yeah, so there's another example in June 2020, EA, what they sent out via Twitter. It's again, we will not tolerate racism. We do not want any toxic behavior. We promise to work on filters, reporting possibilities. We want to deal with the reports really fast and so on. But again, it's just a promise. We will see if something changes. And of course, there are also a lot of universities or research working on solutions. So that's a newspaper article I found from February, where another artificial intelligence solution might help. So, but you know, language is really very, very complex, and people are very creative. They find ways how to trick, of course, artificial intelligence. So researchers really have a hard way, and also companies really, to make it more automatic. Yeah, but what might help sometimes if the communities themselves try to take steps. So these are two examples also happening in 2020. Twitch kind of called for a blackout, so stopping all streams for a day to protest against racial abuses and to protest against all these things going on. And also Reddit communities said, okay, we will go private and we protest because the platforms have to do something against these issues. They have to tackle hate speech. They should do something. So basically, it's not that all people playing games and being around, of course, are bad people. That's what we all know. But if there are some people not playing according to the rules, it can ruin quite a lot. But I think, and that's my conclusion of my talk, it's still a long way to. So we will have a look if the next years will bring some solutions, but I think it's really something, a lot of discussion is needed here. Yeah, so thank you for your interest. So I'll stop the presentation.
Thank you, Sonja, for your presentation. We had a lot of discussions in the chat. And one of the things we were discussing is, as you were speaking about, also League of Legends. And we all know that on the one hand, they're using nudging elements similar to what you presented in Fortnite. And on the other hand, for many years, they had this tribunal, I'm sure you are aware of. But some years ago, they decided to take it offline. Personally, when I tried to reach out with a colleague from Riot, he was not able to give me any kind of numbers and reasons for that step. So my assumptions are that maybe AIs took over for the content analysis, so they do not have no longer to give free items to the players, maybe as a reason, because then they still spend money on the game. Do you have any ideas why they took this tribunal offline, as it was used by so many players, like even myself?
Yeah, so one guess I have might be that it's, of course, it needs a lot of people, and the more reports you have to deal with, the more people you need. And of course, involving a lot of people means it takes a lot of time, of course. And I think it was kind of, as you say, AI is cheaper, is doing a job. You don't need to give players something for free for doing that. That's my guess. That's the reason why they took it off. Yeah.
Let's see in the chat. Sabine said that, speaking about who is responsible and the topics that occur in regards to the toxic behavior, Sabine says, because of internalized racism, sexism, quite a lot of gamers will not accept the conditions of fair play stated in the codes of conduct. Do you have any suggestions for what kind of conversations need to happen to tackle this problem?
I think if I had a solution for this problem, maybe I would be rich if I could suggest it to some game companies. I think that's really a problem. As Sabine says, it's kind of inherent in many papers, all these kind of stereotypes, and games and all kind of media still supports a lot of stereotypes. So I think that really needs a cultural change going on that takes a long, long time. So that's not something which can be handled by game communities and game providers or on their own. So that's something, which really needs to be looked at from many points of view and needs to be tackled by a lot of angles. As long as we have these kind of everyday racism also outside games, why should it stop in a game?